And folks, we're lucky to have Chris Allgyer back. Chris is the president of the High Knob chapter of Virginia Master Naturalists, a retired math instructor from Mountain Empire Community College, and he and his wife Paxton live in Big Stone Gap. And he's really, I credit him with making me notice butterflies. It's not something I used to notice other than, hey, there's a butterfly, but just the intricacies of them and pretty fascinating creatures. So Chris, thank you for speaking to us about monarchs, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Phil. Let me see if I can share my screen and bring up my program. Share. Okay, you should be seeing something now.
Yes.
Okay, and we go to slideshow and get things started from the beginning. All righty. Of course, monarchs right now are in their famous rotation cycle. I'm seeing quite a few come by just about every day, except on a day like this, they're hunkered down. They're not going to be doing much in the way of their migration, but I'm sure most of you are familiar with monarchs and the amazing migration that they go through. Of all the butterflies, they definitely have the best PR representatives, in that the insect decline that we've been seeing over the years affects a lot of insects, but in particular, monarchs get a lot of press and a lot of things. They are fascinating, and they're in the news a lot. So I've got kind of a hodgepodge of things here. Phil asked if I could do something about monarchs this month, so I tried to put together some things. You can really do a whole course on these, but I'll try to keep it within our time limits tonight. So the monarch, Danaus plexippus, is the binary name for them. They're about 3.5 to 4 inches in wingspan, and most of you may already know that they depend on the caterpillars, and the caterpillars need plants in the milkweed family. So part of our discussion tonight will be concerning milkweeds and what we can do to provide for them. They range throughout most of temperate North America, even into Canada. They're also into the tropics. There are monarchs found in South America. They're not migrating like the ones we have. There's some in the Pacific Islands. Australia has some that were introduced. But in North America, most of our monarchs are migratory, although there are pockets of them in Florida and some along the Gulf Coast that might be year-round because of the warmer climates they have and the availability of milkweed year-round for those species. Anytime you talk about butterflies and insects, we need to quickly talk about the metamorphosis, one of the most amazing things I think about insects. Amphibians also go through a type of metamorphosis, but it's a transformation from immature to an adult in 2 or more stages. And butterflies undergo what's called a complete metamorphosis with 4 life stages: an egg, a larva, and for butterflies, the larvae have the special name of caterpillars, also moths. Anything in Lepidoptera, the larva can be called a caterpillar. Then they form a pupa, which is the general term for that 3rd life stage. But for butterflies especially, the term is a chrysalis. And Shad was talking about the little gold that he saw on his monarch chrysalis. Well, the term chrysalis actually comes from a Greek word meaning gold or golden, chrysos. And so many butterflies have gold markings on their chrysalis, and you only use chrysalis for a butterfly. A moth does not make a chrysalis, it turns into a pupa. The word chrysalis is specific to the 3rd stage of the butterfly metamorphosis. And then finally, the magic occurs within that chrysalis, and what emerges is a completely different looking critter, the beautiful butterfly that comes out with wings. It's an amazing transformation from the caterpillar to the adult butterfly. And here's a little life cycle. We use this little form for our junior naturalists at Natural Tunnel and some other places. It's a little coloring page that kids like, that they can go through and see the life cycle of the butterfly and color it in. Here's a little photo I took many years ago with a different camera I got, but here is an egg. You can see it's kind of whitish and not very large, but you can find them on monarch leaves if you're looking for them. They kind of stand out on the leaf. From that little egg will hatch out a small, tiny caterpillar. And the first caterpillar is called the first instar. The term instar is used for the successive stages of caterpillars as they eat, they grow, but they have to shed the skin in order to go to the next instar. I've got a picture of a second instar caterpillar I got this summer at Beth Walker's garden. We found this little guy. One interesting thing about monarch caterpillars is that they have the same coloration and markings through all of their instars. They have the yellow, black, and white striping pattern. They are distasteful to predators, and it serves as kind of a warning that at least a vertebrate predator would not want to try to eat one of these. Invertebrates aren't fazed by the toxic nature of the caterpillar, but vertebrates, if a bird ever ate one of these, they'd get sick and spit it up and say, never again will I touch one of those things. As they grow larger, they go through again shedding the skin until they reach their fourth instar. This is the largest size that they get, and they get pretty hefty. Again, caterpillars basically an eating machine. They eat, but then what goes in has to come out. So you see in that picture a couple little items there that are called frass. The term for insect poop is frass. And when you're hunting for caterpillars, a good thing to look for a lot of times, I'll find the frass before I'll find the caterpillar for many species. So there we have that. Once it gets large enough, something happens and says, I've got to stop eating now. It kind of purges itself a little bit. And then they crawl anywhere from 20 to 30 feet, sometimes quite a distance from their food plants, and attach themselves with their hindquarters attached with a little silk button that they spin the silk, kind of glue themselves on, and hang upside down like that in a J position. And this is when they're ready to transform, not from a caterpillar, but now into a chrysalis. And here we see a newly formed chrysalis. It'll darken a little bit in color. This was taken not too long after it wiggled out of the skin. Many years ago, we had a good crop of caterpillars in our garden. These are probably about 15 years old or more, most of these little pictures that I'm showing right now. So there's a newly formed chrysalis. You can see kind of where I put the arrow here, the pattern that eventually be wings, abdomen up here. It's attached very firmly. This is a different one than the previous picture. This attached looks like on a daylily stem there. And in about 10 days, the chrysalis will turn transparent. This doesn't happen for all butterflies, but it does for the monarch species. And you can see the butterflies in there just waiting to pop out of there. And when they do come out, they hang on to the old chrysalis. Here's a different one, same brood. It's a brother or sister. It looks like, it's a brother of the previous one. It'll hang there and pump fluid into the wings, form them. It'll also have to zip together its proboscis. So you see the top here, the little curl thing. That's a little straw proboscis that the butterfly needs to sip nectar. And when they come out of the chrysalis, that thing is in two pieces. It's like it's been sliced lengthwise, and they got to kind of fit it together and kind of zip it up together into one piece that they can coil and uncoil and use to drink their nectar. Occasionally, they have a misfire and can't get that thing fitted together. So it's a crucial thing to get that proboscis zipped up right. Otherwise, they won't be able to drink the nectar and feed and get their energy. And here's one that was successful. He's on a zinnia. Talked earlier about zinnias being a good source for nectar for a lot of the larger butterflies. Seem to like it, and he's dipping in there to get a drink of nectar. Another plant that we have in our yard is butterfly bush. It's a non-native, but it is a long blooming. As long as you kind of keep it deadheaded and not let it spread its seeds, because some states do consider it invasive, but it is a good nectar source for a lot of pollinators. And right now, I've still got zinnias blooming, I've still got this blooming, and I'm watching the monarchs come in. Yesterday, we had 3 or 4 of them on a sunny day at any given time of day as they were migrating on through. A little bit about identification on monarchs. They are different markings for males and females. So one of the neat things that you can learn tonight, if you don't already know this, is how to tell a boy monarch from a girl monarch. These are pictures of 2 that I raised about, 2 summers ago. I raised about 30 some monarch caterpillars using them for demonstrations at some schools and junior naturalists and other events. And so I was able to get some very nice photos because when they first emerge and dry their wings, they're not ready to really fly yet. And so they'll pose nicely for some pictures. The upper one is a male, and the clear defining aspect of this is that they have these specialized cells on their lower wings. Entomologists still aren't really sure what these are for. They might be producing some kind of pheromones or something else, but only the males have these. Also, if you look at the black veins and compare to the one below, the veins on the male monarch are thinner. Below is a female. She does not have that black spot on the hind wing, and also the veins in her wings, the black veins running through, are thicker. And so that makes it, as long as you can get the butterfly to open its wings, it's pretty easy then to determine if you have a male or a female. There is a mimic of monarchs that we need to look at briefly here, called the viceroy butterfly. Different genus altogether, doesn't feed on milkweed, it feeds on a variety of trees, particularly willow. But it looks very much like the monarch, orange with black veins and white spots around the edges of the wings. It's a little smaller than a monarch, but it is easy to distinguish by the post-medium band. It's black band on the lower wing that runs across midway through the lower wing. You can see my pointer here. That makes it very clear that that is the viceroy butterfly. And the nice thing about that band is that you can see it on either side of the wings. That bottom picture has the viceroy that came by just this summer. Had one come through our yard and posed for me. And it's got the black band that you can see also on the outer side of the wing when the wings are folded upward like that. It was thought for a long time. When I was a kid, I was taught that the monarch was a Batesian mimic, or excuse me, the viceroy was a Batesian mimic of the monarch, that it benefited by resembling the bad tasting monarch. And so that would be a benefit to be like that. In recent years, it's been learned that viceroys themselves aren't very good tasting. And so now, rather than being a Batesian mimic, it's a Mullerian type mimic, in that both species benefit from being bad tasting to birds and other vertebrate animals. And so they help each other out. That's Mullerian mimicry. Talking about migration, one of the most amazing things about the monarchs is the lengthy migration that they take. There are lots of butterflies that do monarch, that do migrate besides the monarch. Painted ladies, for one, make an amazing, even longer migration through Europe and Africa. But in North America, monarchs migrate from north to south. They can fly for many hours, cover an average 40 miles a day, maybe more if they hit the winds just right. and sometimes they're up at altitudes as high as 19,000 feet found. So the monarchs that we have east of the Rocky Mountains are aiming for what we refer to now as a sanctuary in Mexico. It's the Monarch Biosphere Reserve. A few on the East Coast might migrate to Florida. We'll see a migration map in a little bit. What happens is this generation somehow knows not to mate and reproduce when they come out, but save all their energy for this long flight to Mexico, where they kind of hunker down and go dormant through the winter months. And then in the spring, they liven up again, they mate, and this group that is migrating now, they will come back usually in the Texas area and start looking for milkweed, start laying some eggs, and then that generation will come further north, and the second and third and fourth generations will come up into the United States and even make it all the way up into Canada. The one picture I have here on the bottom is an interesting photo I got last year. This was up atop a high knob in late October, I think around October 23rd, 24th, somewhere around then. We were up there collecting some milkweed seeds, and we found this monarch way up there on there. Now, whether it eventually made it to Mexico or not, I don't know. It's kind of late in the season for it to be trying to migrate through. But we'll have stragglers come through. I've even seen monarchs in November in my yard coming through. I doubt if they made it all the way to Mexico, but you never know. In the West, there's a population of monarchs that migrate and overwinter in various sites in California. A few go to Mexico. In both cases, these generation of monarchs might live as long as 6 months before they liven up in the spring and again start mating, start making the journey back north. Unfortunately, monarchs are in decline, especially the Western population. It's literally been decimated. There are concerns that whether or not the Western population of monarchs is going to be able to come back. The Eastern population of monarchs is not in immediate danger, but there are extreme concerns about how the numbers have dropped, particularly over the last 20, 30 years. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Here is a map from Monarch Watch that I got. I found several different maps, but this one shows, I thought was pretty interesting to look at, of the migratory patterns. It is color coded. So if you see this orangey brown, this is showing the eventual pattern of most of the monarchs coming through in the fall to go to pretty far down into Mexico in a remote area where they winter over and all. If you look at the East Coast, there's a little orange line coming down that shows some of them might go into southern Florida, but some others, and they've done this, they know this by banding monarch butterflies, some of them from the East Coast continues on to that spot in Mexico. And only recently, they've got a question mark here, but they're thinking that there might be some of the West Coast monarchs. Most of them winter over in California along the coast where it's reasonably mild for them. But some may be making that path all the way down into Mexico as well. The other thing that's interesting about this, you can see that we're right on the tip of Virginia here of this area that they've colored in here. Now the green arrows are going back up in the spring. And so the green region is where the first generation might be coming up from Mexico to start the breeding, and spring breeding would be in this green region, and then maybe a couple generations, and then they get up into the yellow region up here in the Corn Belt and up in the Northeast for a generation, and eventually make it all the way up to where the northern range of milkweed is in Canada. You see there's a stopping point there where you don't find enough milkweed for them, but they make it all that way. On the return trip, oops, too soon there. On the return trip, a lot of these butterflies have to cross the Great Lakes. And that's kind of amazing feat in itself, the flight patterns. You think that they've got to fly across those Great Lakes as they migrate back to make their way to Mexico. So that's a 2,500 mile, 3,000 mile journey for some of the butterflies to make it all that distance. Incredible that those delicate creatures can do that. How do they know these paths? Well, for many years now, organizations have been doing monarch tagging, where they place little tags with information. They record the information very carefully and log it in. Computers are making this a lot easier now. Monarch Watch is one of the big organizations that's doing this. I think they've tagged over 1.5 million butterflies over the last 15 years or so. And when someone finds a monarch with a tag, you can contact, there's information there to contact and report back where he found the monarch and what his condition was and things like that. So that's how they know. The studies allow them to get information about finding if they make it to Mexico, where did they originate, how long did it take them. You can find a tagged butterfly along a route. I keep looking all the time. I've never found a monarch with a tag, but hoping someday to find one so I can report some data. The picture here was taken in Johnson City at the Jacobs Nature Park a couple years ago. Pax and I have a friend there who works with monarchs, and so we went over there and helped with the tagging. That's me with butterfly net. I caught one, and then you see we place a little tag, little circular sticky tag on the wing to do that. So that's a nice way that folks can do some citizen science. I'd like to maybe next year set up a tagging program along Pine Mountain there at Pound, where we know a lot of the monarchs are coming through. I think it'd be fun to tag some of them and see if we get any that of those that pass through that area to make it all the way to Mexico or not. That's the plan, we hope. Here's a graph showing monarch population decline from 1994-95 up through 2018. 2019, there was another dip again. It didn't do quite as well, I don't think, and all, but overall, the trend is there's a decline. Now, this isn't measuring the actual butterflies. This is measuring the area in hectares of the sites in Mexico where the butterflies have congregated and all. So they've got really low in 2013, 2014. It's jumped up again, 2015, 2016. But you can see why there's a concern about, we're still talking millions of butterflies, but still there's a drop off in their numbers. It's very noticeable. So why is that happening? Well, there's no one easy answer to it. Some people want to say, oh, it's got to be the pesticides and herbicides. Other people say, well, you know, climate change is affecting. All of these factors in some way are impacting the numbers of monarchs that we are having. The loss of overwintering habitat in Mexico is a big concern. That area of Mexico, there are people going in there that want to log and cut things through and change the land. If they take the trees down, well, where butterflies going to roost in and all. So there are concerns about that. Pesticides and herbicides have an effect, but it's probably less than what is. I tried to do some good research on this issue. And so as I did my searches, I made sure I did the site.edu to make sure I was getting accurate scientific data from folks. And right now, of the theory, all these have an effect. It's complicated, but the biggest cause is the decline in the milkweed supply. That is the biggest issue, and it's due to land use changes and other factors. But that the science seems to say that's the biggest cause and reason why we're seeing a decline in our monarchs. So remedies. Since analysis shows that loss of milkweeds is most responsible, basically to bring the monarch back, we need to bring the milkweeds back. And so we've got to have those caterpillars and good, healthy chrysalids to become monarchs. So there are several groups. One of the biggest ones promoting it, I'll put a link to their website up at the end of this, is Monarch Watch. And there are some other good groups and are advocating accelerated planting of milkweed along particularly the migratory corridors, public areas, highway medians, federal lands. It doesn't have to be the farmlands that we're doing this, although there are farmers for monarch groups that are out and about and trying to convince farmers not to just destroy all the milkweed, but look at that. But homes, parks, and schools. And the goal that I saw on, I think it was Iowa State University entomologist said there, if we can replant about 1.4 million acres, that might be what it takes in order to bring back monarchs to the numbers that they were 20, 30, 40 years ago. You know, so that's the goal for doing that. So milkweed. I did a presentation for Master Gardeners a while back, and so I'm going to share part of that in the middle of this presentation. The presentation I did was the importance of milkweed, but also realize it's not just for monarchs. You plant milkweed in your gardens, in your yards, you can enjoy a lot of interesting critters and contribute to the nature and the ecology and all. So milkweed is genus Asclepias. It's named milkweed because of the latex, a milky substance, and that substance contains cardiac glycosides that are termed cardenolides. And this is where the butterfly gets its toxicity from that helps protect it. Other insects can handle it. Humans don't want to taste it. It's not going to kill you right off. It'll definitely taste bad and be nasty. And you'll learn very quickly not to try to ingest it. But it also blooms, as you can see. They have nice flowers. They have interesting seed pods. So it adds some interest to your garden in particular. And we get a whole bunch of interesting insects come along. One of the first things I see in my yard, in my milkweed beds, are the large milkweed bugs, orange and black. It's interesting how most of these have adapted that orange-black coloration as a warning to other things that they might be toxic. There's also a small milkweed bug, a little bit similar, but a little bit different markings. They have an X on their back when you compare them. There's also a little bit of a pest that comes in there in milkweed plants called Oleander Aphid. They are an invasive from the Mediterranean that came in on oleander plants, but they found out they also like things in the milkweed family. So if you grow milkweed, there's no way to avoid, you're going to get these yellow aphids. They're going to show up at some point on your milkweed plants. Here's a nifty guy. This is the red milkweed beetle. He's a longhorned beetle with the long antennae. They are kind of cool, I think, and colorful. And don't see these as often, but this is kind of like a ladybird beetle or ladybug that's kind of on steroids. It's bigger than a ladybug and kind of muscular looking, but a very interesting looking beetle that can show up, particularly on one of the species of milkweed is called a swamp milkweed that gardeners often grow. Here's some milkbud nymphs on a seed pod, and also one of my favorite caterpillars is the milkweed tussock moth caterpillar. Again, black and orange and white coloration. It'll turn into a tiger moth, a pretty little white moth. So if you grow milkweed, not only are you feeding the monarch caterpillars, but also a lot of other things, and then things feed on these. So frogs might enjoy a taste of some of these, and some other beneficial wasps and things will prey on some of these spiders. So it's part of the overall food chain, and milkweed can support it a lot. Even other caterpillars, like the salt marsh caterpillar, was on a milkweed up in Ohio a few years ago. They feed on a lot of different plants, but again, by growing this plant, it's not really a weed. It can be a beneficial addition to your garden area. You know, especially if you grow one of my favorite blooming milkweeds is the Asclepias tuberosa, which is the called the butterfly weed. I wouldn't call it a weed. Beautiful blooming, brings in all kinds of butterflies. Again, it can be a food source for the caterpillars of a monarch, but it can also be a great source for pollinating bees and wasps and flies, and particularly these lovely great spangled fritillaries that often show up on this plant. So if you're going to grow milkweed, there are about 14 species native in Virginia, but there are 3 species that are commonly grown and considered the best to include for monarchs: the common milkweed, the butterfly weed that we just saw, and the swamp milkweed, which has kind of pinkish blooms on them. Of these 3, I wouldn't recommend the common milkweed for most ordinary home gardens unless you're okay with it spreading all over the place, because it spreads by the root system and they can take over. Now, if you've got a meadow area, it'd be great to have some of those. For your typical flower gardens, butterfly weed, the tuberosa, and the incarnata, the swamp milkweed, are probably what you want to plant. They won't take over your whole garden area. You can find some of these at garden centers, particularly butterfly weed and swamp milkweed, and seeds are more and more available. I've grown mine from seed. It takes a little bit of work because you have to cold treat the seed. And one way to do this is sow it into moist soil or a paper towel, wrap it in plastic, and put in the refrigerator for 2 to 3 weeks, and then bring it out when it's time to warm up. Needs about 60, 75 degree. You can start them indoors to germinate, or you can later on sow outdoors, either in early spring or early fall. This came from a seed catalog that I often use. Pine Tree Garden Seeds has that. You see a seed pod shown there with some ripe seeds. Last year, a group of master naturalists assisted the U.S. Forest Service to collect native wildflower seeds, particularly milkweed. They were going to replant an area around High Knob Tower, and we were out collecting these seeds. They are kind of neat looking. They'll eventually blow away in little silk parachutes. In fact, the silk was used to make life preservers during World War II, I believe. Interesting little obscure fact about milkweed at the time. This came up just this past week on Facebook. This is my home county up in Ohio, Miami County, Ohio. And they're doing a similar project throughout Ohio. They have a pollinator habitat initiative, and they're asking people to collect milkweed seeds and showing that you don't want to pick the seeds when they're not ripe yet. You want to wait till the pod turns dry, and they're collecting them. And also you put them in a brown paper bag or cardboard box so you don't trap moisture. So there are various states that are trying to do different initiatives to increase the number of milkweed throughout the state, and hopefully Virginia will be doing some of this as well. In fact, the Forest Service was doing this up at High Knob, so that's a good thing. Raising monarchs. I mentioned that I've raised, a couple years ago, I raised about 30 monarchs to adulthood, getting some caterpillars from various sites or actually bringing in some eggs. It's kind of controversial about doing this. There are companies that raise thousands of monarchs, and then they sell them to be released for weddings or birthday parties or things. And the issues with those is that monarchs being raised in captivity may be losing some of the native features of the monarch. The tagging programs are suggesting that monarchs in captivity are less likely to make it to Mexico. And they've done measurements on captive-born monarchs, and basically they are weaker and not as strong on average. And so people who are raising hundreds and hundreds of monarchs in captivity, thinking that, well, they can help the problem by rescuing those eggs and bringing them in and taking care of them, they might be doing more harm than good. Another issue would be diseases that could be multiplied by the fact that these are within captivity. In the wild, it's estimated that probably only 5% of caterpillars reach adulthood. And so those that make it all the way to become an adult are the fittest ones, which you want for a healthy population and all. You can raise the caterpillars. What I'm showing there on the upper slide shows I've got a slightly damp paper towel that I place the leaves on. I rinse the leaves off and then try to maintain and clean. You see the pellets of frass throughout there. Try not to overcrowd, but you can do this in ways that will make sure you get healthy butterflies. One on the picture there is one that is getting ready to make his first flies, the female. You can tell by the thick veins and no speck dot on the wings and all. And so in terms of raising monarchs, most of the good, well-established sites will say, while it's not a conservation strategy and they're not in favor of releasing large numbers of monarchs like some folks are doing, raising a few monarchs as a family project or for education or for citizen science, they say it's perfectly fine. In fact, they like that because they can help educate people about the monarchs and butterflies in general and all. So here's a picture. These are pictures Paxton took of one of the school visits that I made. I think that's the Jonesville Middle School that I visited, and showing some various stages of caterpillars. And also there's a chrysalis that's about ready to emerge. Unfortunately, the darn fellow didn't come out while we were in class. I was hoping he'd make his emergence then, but wasn't to be. But anyway, I did raise quite a few. Again, the recommended number that I saw on Xerxes' side and some others say, if you're doing about 25 to 30 caterpillars, that's fine. You get up a lot more than that, then they're not so sure that that's good in terms of the overall health of the monarch population. So what are the problems that you run into when you raise butterflies and also out in the wild? We mentioned that vertebrates will learn very quickly not to chew on a monarch. They'll get sick and they avoid them. But there are invertebrates. So if you collect caterpillars, make sure when you bring in the food, you're not bringing in a spider. Try to keep wasps and predatory bugs away from them. And there are also some diseases that can affect caterpillars. Here's a diseased chrysalis that is infected with Kinetic Flies, which are a small, about the size of a housefly maybe. They're kind of hairy. They got red eyes. They lay little eggs on all kinds of species of caterpillars. And so you may bring in a caterpillar that's perfectly healthy, but it's already got a hatchling fly maggot inside it that's feeding. You won't know that until after the caterpillar makes its chrysalis. But the maggots come out. They actually rappel down from the chrysalis with a little thread that comes out. You see a little thread on the diseased chrysalis here. Down the bottom of the cage, they turn into a pupa, and you get a fly that comes out. I had this happen to 3 caterpillars a couple years ago. I collected the flies and gave them the fill to send to Virginia Tech so they could identify that that's what they were. And it's a fairly common occurrence that you're going to run into, particularly later in the year. So that's one thing that can go wrong. The other concern about raising caterpillars in captivity is this parasite, this disease called OE. Now, you can try to pronounce that, just call it OE, that's spread by spores that come off the wings and bodies of the adult butterflies. Those are spread onto the milkweed, and then the caterpillar can ingest it. It might weaken, it might kill the caterpillar. It'll definitely weaken if the butterfly does emerge. And when butterflies are raised in captivity, these can multiply and become a real problem when they're released If these butterflies carry this protozoa to Mexico, then they can affect other butterflies and all. And so that's a concern to be careful of. There are ways under a little magnifier to inspect the butterflies before you release them. And there are things you can try to do to ensure that this isn't happening. Good practices are rinsing off your milkweed before serving it to caterpillars. If you do have chrysalids, try to separate those from your other caterpillars, because if a butterfly does emerge that is carrying that OE, the spores can drop down onto your feeding caterpillars. So always move your chrysalids to another critter cage and all that. You want to regularly clean out the frass and rinse and dry your caterpillar cages when you do change over. And at the end of the season, you should rinse the cages with a bleach solution to ensure that you're killing off any of the spores, so that next season you start out nice and fresh with uncontaminated caterpillars. Listing some online resources here. The Monarch Watch is a very good site to go to. They have a lot of things on that site. Just Google monarchwatch.org and go to that site, and you can find a tremendous amount of information about butterflies, and particularly about monarchs at that site. The Xerces Society has a lot of information about a variety of things. They really focus on native plants and native creatures and trying to protect our environment in many different ways. They have a portion of their site directed entirely to monarchs for monarch conservation. And that's, I kind of grabbed this little picture here on the bottom here. This is a group of migrating butterflies. They're not in Mexico yet. I'm thinking this is probably, they probably crossed Lake Erie and are on an oak tree up in northern Ohio somewhere. One of my goals is to get up there someday. I don't know if I'll make it to Mexico or not, but there are sites where the monarchs come through in large numbers sometimes. This is from a few years ago where they had a good migration come through. And these are butterflies that are resting after crossing Lake Erie into northern Ohio. And there are places where they kind of promote this. People come and see these. So that's where that photo is taken. Here's another big picture of it. And that's basically my presentation. Is kind of short compared to others. I didn't want to go overboard on this, but I'll certainly try to answer any questions that any of you might have regarding these guys. I still love that picture. Wouldn't that be fun to see something like that all at once at one time? So let me stop the share and get back to some things and allow you to speak up. I guess, well, pretty good, 6:45. So I was hoping about 45 minutes and then some questions. So what do we have to say? I can look at the chat now if anybody have anything they want to do. How do they know where to go? Excellent question. They think it's a combination of first of all, how do they know when to go is a combination of the shortening days and the temperatures and a variety of things. That's one thing. If you're bringing butterflies indoors to raise them, they may not be getting the same hours of daylight effect that would help them eventually navigate through. There are some things, you know, it's instinctual. There are some things in that tiny little brain that enables them somehow to figure out where to go. And so the question, if you took a chrysalis from here to the East Coast, where would it go? I'm not exactly sure. That'd be an interesting experiment. Maybe someone's done that. Here, I've noticed that butterflies, when you see them here flying, they'll stop by and feed, but then when they get up in the air, they're almost always headed toward the southwest direction this time of year. See them flying through. Dogbane, I'm not sure if, I know the moth, the milkweed moth, you can move that to dogbane. I've never known anyone to move the monarch caterpillars to dogbane though. I'm not sure. I'm sure if it would be helpful, I would have come across that. I've never seen that reference. People sometimes run out of milkweed and say, "What am I going to do? I'm out of milkweed." So I'm thinking that dogbane probably isn't an alternate food source for them. It is for the moth, but not for them. So, okay, an extension tour to go to Mexico. Yeah. If we can meet the COVID requirements and do all that and get our passports in shape, that might be something. Although that's kind of a dangerous place, I'm not so sure. Last year, you may have seen in the news a year ago, there was a gentleman there that had been taking care of and monitoring the sites for many, many years there in Mexico and trying to protect those sites from the loggers and some other maybe disreputable folks that might be coming in to harm those overwintering sites. And he was murdered. He disappeared all of a sudden, and then they found him like 3 weeks later, and he had been murdered for whatever reason. So they made some enemies there trying to protect the site there in Mexico. So that's a little bit of concern. It's not just our lack of milkweed in areas. Extreme weather conditions can affect things. I'm worried about in California. What are these wildfires doing to their populations? And not only the monarchs, but animals in general, and plants and all. As the climate change thing in the spring of this year, there's extremely warmer weather in Mexico and in Texas, and so they said the monarch butterflies came through about 3 weeks earlier than their average appearance when they came in Texas. Well, if the milkweed's not blooming then, or milkweed plants aren't up and out then that could upset their ability to multiply and also so many different things affect their success rates. Any other questions you want to come up with now? I tried to look up. Yeah, go ahead.
One about whether there had been a move to do a lot of roadside plannings.
Yes.
And the question always comes up of whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, because you're kind of attracting them to an area that, while available, might predispose them to collisions.
Yeah, I think that's being considered and looked at. I would think there'd be a little bit of a problem there. Looking up, they're farmers and ranchers that maybe didn't like milkweed. There is concern if you're doing no-till farming, particularly in the corn belt, some regions, that because the common milkweed can spread so easily, it could become a little issue. There are some myths about milkweed that it will kill your livestock and all. That's probably overblown, because most livestock, if they get a taste of milkweed, they're not going to, it tastes so bad that I don't think they would eat enough to die from it and all. But there are myths. I also did find there is a group I've mentioned of farmers for milkweed and farmers for monarchs in the Midwest area that are trying to promote more milkweed along the sides of the fields or in areas that can help out. So, but again, what I'm saying is the number one concern is many reasons, but lack of milkweed, particularly in the areas where they migrate through and coming up in the spring. You've got to have those spring milkweeds there. I should mention there's a milkweed that is tropical milkweed that you can have some of it around here. It's not a problem here because it'll die back, but in the warmer states, the tropical milkweed won't die back unless they get a hard freeze, and it can accumulate that OE pathogen over time and infect more butterflies. So they're trying to discourage people from planting non-native tropical milkweed. I've heard a few people around here that grow it. It's not so much a problem here because it will die back, and so that problem of accumulating the OE won't happen. My own feeling is always try to plant native anyway. Master naturalists, we need to promote our native plants. And so the native milkweed, swamp milkweed, the butterfly weed, and the common milkweed are all good things to have.
I actually watched the movie that you referred to about the guy that got murdered. There was a movie put out about that, I believe, or something on Netflix.
There could be. It was tragic. A lot of people were very upset about that. He's evidently a good person that was doing a lot for monarch conservation, and it was very sad. It was coming up all over my Twitter feed and my Facebook feed of entomologists. They were concerned when he disappeared. They kind of feared the worst at the time, and then unfortunately they did find that he had been killed. I'm not sure if they got the culprits or not. I didn't follow through on that.
You would think that would be very high dollar tourism possibility.
Well, it is, but it's in a remote mountainous area of Mexico where there are a lot of people who are barely scraping by. And so if they can turn money by harvesting trees and wood and timber and all, then, you know, they're likely to be doing that. Maybe they might be growing illegal drugs and things as well on some of the land. So they cut down everything and burn everything down to use it for that. So because it's in such a poor area and remote, it makes it it's concerning to think you know what happens if those areas they are a lot smaller. There have been places that have been lost over the years where the monarchs migrate to, and so.
Is there any effort to try to raise funds in the United States to try to maybe help Mexico lay more and more of that area aside?
I'm thinking that is happening. I don't know the details, but I would think there certainly would be some groups that are trying to do that. Of course, we need to think about, while monarchs are crucial, there are other pollinators that are even maybe more important. Our native bees and our bumblebees, they're declining. Insects in general are declining. Our bird population is declining. They're kind of tied together. If you don't have the insects to feed the birds, then they're going to decline. So the whole ecosystem at times is threatened. And I guess that's always been the case as certain animals go extinct. But we're at a point now where we really have to watch out. The insects are kind of like the canary in the mine in terms of warning us that if we don't do something to protect them and change some of our ways, we can be in real trouble.
Has there been any effort to try to maybe do more on strip mine sites with the common milkweed?
You know, I haven't seen that, but I don't see why that couldn't happen. You know, as they reseed those and put native plants in, to try to replace the invasives as much as possible and replace with natives, not just milkweed, but other good native plants as well. So that's something to definitely consider. What I see on old strip mines are the budleia, the butterfly bushes, show up on a lot of stripped areas accidentally. And of course, the good thing about them, they provide a neat nectar source, a long-term nectar source. The bad thing is, though, there aren't any caterpillars that feed on them, and they displace some of the native plants that are needed by our native insects. So, but yeah, strip mine sites would be good. I think there are some folks that are trying to promote more milkweed use. Lots of school groups do this. You can get free packets of seeds if you want the swamp milkweed seeds. You can get packets of those. You can hand them out during Halloween. I saw people were doing that. Instead of giving the kids candy and stuff, give them milkweed seeds to plant. So
I was kind of thinking that Pine Mountain is like an interstate for those things as they migrate, and that happens to run right through the coal fields. So if we made a concerted effort to do something on the strip mine sites, then that kind of puts them right along their interstate headed south. So
I was surprised at the large amount of milkweed that we found last year when we were doing that project for the Forest Service. I was really surprised, and it wasn't just one species. There were several different species of milkweed that were common up on the high knob area where we were searching for plants, and it wasn't hard to find at all. You could go a little ways, and there it was along some of those logging roads and other places and areas. So it is there for them. Again, I'd like to tag some of those. Go up there next year and capture some and get our master naturalists up there to gather some data on them. Maybe get some school kids as well if we can. Be a nice project for scout groups or other groups to do that. 4-H groups, 4-H kids do that, and then tag the butterflies and maybe find out if anyone's passing through or making it all the way to Mexico or not. That'd be great. Fun to do, and also we'll try to remind me that praying when I'm sitting around not doing anything to start ordering the tagging kits and all.
we were messaging while you were talking that we would be very much in favor of that. There was a lot of enthusiasm for it. So
okay, great. Yeah, that'd be all for it. I think I still have my skills with the butterfly net. When I was a kid, I was a holy terror running around the neighborhood catching butterflies. And, nowadays, what I do, I've got a net I keep out in my garden. I catch cabbage whites when they're flying through and make sure they're not getting on my broccoli and things. But, so once you learn, never forget. It's like playing tennis, hitting a tennis ball. And get the time you can do it. As Paxton says, so I'm kind of funny looking doing it. So he's snickering away. Well, that's all I have. I don't want to keep it past your 7 o'clock. So I appreciate your enthusiasm for this and the opportunity to do this.
Thanks for another excellent program, Chris. I appreciate it very much.
Great stuff, Chris. Thank you. Awesome.
Thank you. Looking forward to Thursday's program.
Yeah. Jeremy, you want to key us in on what's happening Thursday?
Sure. John McGregor with Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife Resources. He's based in Frankfort. He is going to actually be talking to us about salamanders of Central Appalachia. He's done a lot of work over the years. Matter of fact, he was telling me a story today about he can remember in the 70s traveling from Eola back towards Highway 160 looking for salamanders along Black Mountain. So it should be a good one. John does a really great job and stuff like that. He's a herpetologist, and so I think he said he had 150 some slides, photos of salamanders. So it should be a good one. So that's it for Thursday evening.
And the 3 agents did kind of chat today about future programming, and I think we've got stuff planned through the end of January as far as these Zoom sessions go. So help us get the word out if you don't mind. If you got neighbors and family who you think might be interested in some of these, and we as we post these on our Facebook, and a lot of you are very good about sharing those with on your own social media sites. So if you see these on Facebook, please feel free to share those, and we'll draw a few more people into these.
Great job, Chris.
Yes.